Greetings, I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, with a review of the new Terror Train remake and its sequel, which both came out in 2022. Yes, you're hearing that right. There was not only a remake of Terror Train released back in October of 2022, but there was also a sequel to said remake released on New Year's Eve of 2022, just a couple months apart from each other, and I didn't hear about either of these Terror Train movies until just a few weeks ago. And you might be wondering why you've never heard of them either. Well, it's because these movies were released direct to Tubi. You know, that free movie and TV app? Yeah, that's not a good sign, but when I saw this horrible poster, I just knew I needed to cover this movie. This awful Photoshop job made me fall in love. Just like how you'll fall in love with this video's sponsor, me! Check out the official Dr. Wolfula TeePublic store for Savage as Fuck shirts, mugs with my mug, and any merch in between. teepublic.com/user/Dr. Wolfula. Anyway, before I discuss the Terror Train remake and, its same-year sequel, let's discuss briefly the original Terror Train, released back in 1980. No! The original Terror Train is no classic. It's not even really a good horror movie. It's just fine. You know, like Megan. Just fine. Terror Train was mostly just notable for being one of the first in a wave of 80s slasher movies following Halloween's popularization of the subgenre. This was still the early days for slasher movies too, when producers were trying to crack the code to Halloween's success. Was it being set on a holiday? Was it the masked killer stabbing youths? Or was it just Jamie Lee Curtis screaming? Halloween's success was ultimately due to the talent behind and in front of the camera, the enthusiasm of young filmmakers making the best movie they can with what little they have. But that's not something a movie producer is able to wrap their brain around most of the time. So early slasher films like Terror Train opted to just turn the masked killer stalking teens on a holiday thing into a formula itself. And a couple early slasher movies like Terror Train even managed to nab Jamie Lee Curtis to enhance unofficial associations with John Carpenter's horror classic.
Is that why you told me it was your idea? Because I said I'd never go to another one of his fucking parties.
Terror Train seemed like it was made with full awareness that the year it would come out would be filled with other Halloween clones like it, so it's filled with gimmicks to help it stand out from the competition. Which was smart, because another New Year's Eve slasher movie came out the same year, aptly titled New Year's Evil. Terror Train isn't just a New Year's slasher movie, though. It's also a New Year's slasher movie that obviously takes place on a train, with a famous magician guest star performing illusions at a costume party. And there's even a twist involving cross-dressing, beating Sleepaway Camp to the punch. The original Terror Train is not as fun as it sounds, but it does have its moments. It is a little random remaking Terror Train 42 years later, though. It doesn't really have a fan base to speak of, and it wasn't really a big hit when it came out. Watching the new Terror Train, though, it's clear that its purpose isn't to capitalize on a movie's legacy because, let's face it, Terror Train has no legacy. But instead, the Terror Train remake is just a matter of taking an existing title and script and making it contemporary in order to reach a new audience of teens looking for a movie to stream at, like, a slumber party or something. Since the Terror Train remake is made for viewers who probably don't even know it's a remake, the 2022 script is almost identical to the original movie's script.
Hey, now this is what I call a party.
Oh, God saw everything they did made, and behold, it was very good.
It's not a shot-for-shot remake like the 1998 Psycho, but it's definitely a scene-for-scene remake. Both Terror Trains play out exactly the same, except the remake has a different twist. But besides that, the remake sticks pretty close to its source material, down to the copperplate font and the original movie's backstory.
Say hello to our special guest.
Courtesy of Alana.
A fraternity plays a prank on a dorky pledge named Kenny, who thinks he's going to get laid by Alana here, but in reality he's coaxed into nearly doing the mommy and daddy dance with a cadaver, which traumatizes Kenny and shatters his psyche.
Whoa, it's a dead body!
Ideally, you go into a remake like this with absolutely no familiarity with the original film, because otherwise you're just going to spend the whole time watching the movie comparing it to another movie. But unfortunately, not only have I seen the original Terror Train a few times already, but I also made the mistake of watching the original movie right before watching the new one. I did a double feature stream of both Terror Train movies back to back with my Patreon supporters. In fact, I host die-in theater horror movie live streams every Sunday for my Patreon supporters. supporters. Only $5 a month. Consider supporting me on patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula.
I gotta make a buck, Alana. I know it's hard, but try not to judge.
But like I said, I ended up spending a lot of the time watching the Terror Train remake, comparing it to the original. It's hard not to compare the two films, especially after just watching the original movie, and my recurring observation regarding the new Terror Train was that it was just like the original Terror Train, but shittier. And the prologue of the remake does a fantastic job of illustrating just that. Kenny's traumatic encounter is so much more fucked up in the original movie because, for one, the cadaver looks like a believably desecrated corpse, a mixture of gruesome practical effects and a real actress, while the remake's cadaver only looks slightly made up. Besides the chest scars, it just looks like a lady sleeping. The original movie's Kenny also looks more like a total misfit, the kind of outcast you see in the real world, so his freakout garners a lot more sympathy from me compared to the Kenny we see in the remake, who looks like he could easily be casted in the role of a jock in any other movie. And that was the running theme of the Terror Train remake. It's just like the original movie, but kinda shittier. And the original movie wasn't great to begin with. The new movie just looks chintzy compared to the original, which had the benefit of having a legitimate cinematographer, John Alcott, the guy who worked with Kubrick on 2001, Clockwork Orange, and The Shining. The original Terror Train isn't an amazing-looking movie, it's still an 80s low-budget Canadian slasher flick, but its lighting and framing makes it look nicer than a lot of its contemporaries, while the remake just has a generic soap opera look to it. So yeah, watching the original Terror Train right before the new movie definitely does it no favors, but at the same time, it was kind of fun comparing and contrasting the two versions, sort of like doing one of those spot the difference games, and you know, there are some differences. Like the staff of the train in the remake is all female. Oh my god, this train has a female conductor? We're all gonna die!
Those rich college kids, they think they can get away with anything.
The remake takes place on Halloween instead of New Year's, so the costume party theme of the two movies makes a bit more sense in the remake. Honestly, the original Terror Train was probably supposed to take place on Halloween, but then they managed to cast Jamie Lee Curtis and decided, it might hit too close to home, and just changed it to New Year's last minute.
Hey, come on. It's New Year's, let's be happy.
Also, quite obviously, the killer in the remake's first costume is not a Groucho Marx getup, but instead just a generic killer clown, because Groucho Marx's ghost is very litigious.
They do all the work. That's ridiculous. They can't be bored. I haven't even started.
No, in actuality, they probably went with a killer clown because most of this movie's target audience is Gen Z, and they wouldn't get the Groucho Marx reference.
Okay, now you're just being annoying.
The other costume in the remake is not so much a kaiju-looking thing like the original movie. It looks more like a shitty iguana costume held together with push pins.
By the way, that stunt out there with the sword? Oh.
Both the original and remake have a character known only as the Magician, but, in the original movie, they got David Copperfield in his early 20s, a real magician, to entertain the party, and he did real tricks on screen to the point where the film feels like it forgets it's a slasher movie and is just a David Copperfield HBO special. With the remake, though, the Magician is just an ordinary middle-aged actor. All of his illusions are done through the power of editing.
Hey, how'd you do that little trick earlier where you disappeared into thin air?
Well, if I told you, I'd have to kill you.
The Magician is much more of a character in these new Terror Train movies, though. And a weird choice they make is having the Magician creepily attracted to Alana, who is half his age. They have this will-they-won't-they romantic tension between the Magician and Alana throughout the two films, and their age difference never comes up. It'd be a little more endearing if the Magician was David Copperfield's age in the original movie, but when the guy is old enough to be the main character's father, it's just kinda gross.
I have a 20-year-old single malt backstage. You care to join me? Appreciation for your participation this evening.
Another big difference between the original movie and the remake comes down to the time period. Both movies depict a party thrown by a fraternity, and, you know, people with common sense should catch on that the actions of this fraternity should not be emulated, especially seeing as how they use a corpse for a prank in the first 5 fucking minutes. But the remake makes sure to have the frat president inform the partygoers beforehand that they must receive consent.
Our fraternity is committed to respect and inclusion for our members and guests. Make sure to receive consent when engaging engaging in any sexual activity.
Blah, blah, blah. And it just feels like a transparent measure taken by the makers of this film that they don't condone the terrible behavior displayed by fraternities. And no shit, that's the whole point of Terror Train. Depicting the depravity of fraternities, how far they can go virtually unchecked. It should go without saying that the characters are terrible and they get fucking killed for it.
You do not have my consent to touch me. That's a rule that isn't made to be broken.
The worst dialogue of the remake just ends up taking some of the edge off the material, and it doesn't stop at the dialogue.
What are you hiding under here? A turtle or a python?
The bloodshed of the remake is toned down from the original film, but what's really bad is that the remake makes extensive use of CGI to execute its killings. Digital blades, keyed-in blood spurts. It's all very cartoony and always disappointing to see on display compared to blood and gore shot in camera. That'll always look better because it's actually physically there. The CGI blood is often just a flourish used to enhance the bloodshed, but I don't see why they couldn't just shoot blood squirting out in camera instead of adding it later. So the Terror Train remake is a functional remake ultimately that just doesn't compare well after watching the original movie. But discounting that, the remake still looks generic with a lot of evident corner cutting. Still, you know, the remake is reasonably entertaining, especially for something that's free to watch on Tubi in between ads for arthritis medication. Now I'm moving on to reviewing the sequel to the remake, released on New Year's Eve 2022. Just 2 months after the previous movie's debut. But in order to review the remake's sequel, I have to discuss the remake's ending. So if you don't want that spoiled, skip to this time code and just watch the movie, motherfucker. It's free on Tubi. But please, come back and watch the rest of this video. Please? Now, in the original Terror Train, it's revealed that Kenny was in disguise as the magician's femboy assistant, which was a pretty surprising twist. The killer was in plain sight the whole time, like a magic trick. But, you know, it didn't quite make sense how Kenny was able to switch his disguises so rapidly without anybody noticing. And it also brought up the question of whether or not David Copperfield was aware his assistant was a guy when they'd fuck. I mean, every magician is fucking their assistant after all. That's just how it works. It's the only perk of being a magician.
He didn't know how to cut me into pieces.
The remake's magician doesn't have an assistant though, femboy or otherwise, which is kinda sad for him. But it made me wonder how they were gonna handle the reveal of Kenny, and well, after Alana's latest run-in with the killer, Kenny just pops out undisguised and scolds her.
Wasn't very nice of you, was it?
I've regretted it ever since.
Then why are you still friends with all of those horrible people?
You know, Kenny does have a point. Alana is just as much of a piece of shit as her friends for just looking the other way. Fuck her, she deserves to die. Having said that, the magician kills the unarmed Kenny on the spot. The ultimate magic trick. He made a young man's life disappear. If you think about it, cops are kinda like magicians. In the end, it's revealed that Kenny was dressed as a bunny the whole time, which is somehow more effeminate than actual cross-dressing. But he could have never killed anybody. He was hiding in plain sight as a bunny anytime the killing did happen. Who was the killer then? Well, the movie just rips off the original Friday the 13th, which coincidentally came out the same year as the original Terror Train. After discovering that the magician has been brutally killed, it turns out that the conductor, Carney, a gender-bent version of the Ben Johnson character from the original movie, is revealed to have been the killer the whole time.
Do you even know how you fucked him up, my sweet little boy?
Carney was the mother of Kenny, and she was pissed off about her son getting traumatized. So instead of just suing the college and the fraternity, having the students involved expelled, she instead murdered them all, and got her son killed in the process, having him tag along unnecessarily. Probably wasn't the best move, but, you know, Karens, Carneys, aren't sensible. And after Carney stabs Alana and prepares to throw her off the train, Alana turns the tables and the preceding shot looks like total shit. The version with Kenny dying in the original was so much more savage as fuck. Anyway, Alana lives, along with David Arquette, the magician. And I guess Carney also lives. You can't keep a Karen down. Now, I'm gonna try to keep my review of Terror Train 2 brief, because it kinda just covers familiar ground. A year after the events of the previous film, Alana has entered medical school and is haunted by the deaths of her shitty friends.
You think you can spend your life helping people when everyone around you dies?
She can't cut anybody open without opening fresh wounds of her own. Racked by her survivor's guilt, Alana's totally not suspicious, totally not a red herring of her roommate Claudia suggests a brilliant idea. Have Alana ride the Terror Train again on New Year's Eve.
It's a real event, and I know it sounds crazy, but I like their take on it. Whole new year, whole new you.
The train, of course, has since capitalized on the bloodbath that happened a year ago, hosting parties themed after a horrible recent massacre with fucked up true crime-obsessed Gen Z kids in attendance, one of whom looks like a decomposing Timothy Chalamet. Alana isn't the only one returning to the Terror Train. She's also joined by Sadie, the new conductor after Carney took that nasty spill, the class president who spends both movies just standing around, Pet, who takes advantage of her association with the killing spree for internet clout,
Kill the old year to ring in the new one, blah, 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 blah. Hey.
And of course, the magician returns with new tricks up his sleeve. Extremely shitty tricks.
Okay. Maybe not the top card on the pile.
Sure, this party seems like an invitation for another killing spree to happen, but don't worry. This time the train has a security guard. A non-binary security guard.
There are to be no weapons, costume, or otherwise.
It's good to know that even terror trains can be progressive.
You're a guest on this train. I'm security.
Surely with one security guard in attendance, no murders will transpire on this New Year's Eve. Actually, yeah, murders definitely happen anyway, because of course they do. And if you thought the killer's costume and kills looked cheap in the previous movie, wait until you see the sequel. I was kinda hoping, since Terror Train 2 wouldn't have the script of the original movie to fall back on, it'd feel a little more fresh. But instead of coming up with a clever way to have the same characters end up in a train-centric slasher scenario, or just make up new characters, Terror Train 2 just resorts to recycling tropes used by the Scream franchise, commenting on sequels and the capitalization of human tragedies.
These are real people and they lost their lives. What's wrong with you?
Terror Train 2 just becomes a typical Scream movie where you don't know who the killer is, you're left wondering if it could be Carney, who supposedly is still alive, or a copycat Carney donning the old bat's Karen haircut. But without spoiling things too hard, if you've seen Scream 4, you'll see Terror Train 2's twist coming a mile away with its social media angle. It's a total knockoff.
What a lively party for such a deadly train!
What's really sad is that the sequel, in a meta way, acts like the previous Terror Train was a big deal and it'll be a hard act to follow.
I can't believe it's really you guys here.
Well, it's us. We're real.
But Terror Train 1 and 2 were made back to back. They had no way of knowing while making the sequel whether or not the first one would be a hit. So they were being really optimistic that that Terror Train remake would take the world by storm and not just be released direct to Tubi.
Hey, can I grab a screaming selfie for just $10? Wait, seriously?
Terror Train 2 runs out of steam quick, feeling especially forced. None of the characters feel like they should be there, so why should we as an audience be there with them? Because it's free on Tubi and we're desperate for entertainment in our increasingly connected yet isolated world? Yeah, that's probably it. But hey, we still have to watch commercials.
I mean, is anyone else excited about the free shipping? I am.
And invest our time into a movie on Tubi, and I don't think Terror Train 2 is worth that at least. It's the same deal as the previous Terror Train, cheap-looking with poorly executed kills and uninteresting characters, but this time it all just feels directionless, which is a little alarming since it's about a train. I'd say the Terror Train remake at least is worth checking out for free on Tubi, especially if you haven't seen the original and you're looking to kill an hour and a half, but probably skip the sequel unless you really like the remake for some reason.
Alana, would it kill you to smile? It's the new year.
Ultimately, I'd recommend watching the original Terror Train instead. It's just a better execution of the slasher movie on a train concept, and it's also free to watch on Tubi anyway. Both these new Terror Train movies just look like they were made in 2006 in the worst possible way. I give Terror Train 1 and 2, 2022, a bunny costume and a femboy magician's assistant. And just to make this clear, this video wasn't sponsored by Tubi or anything. I never used Tubi before, and I only used it to watch the movies discussed in this video. This video is sponsored by the folks on my Patreon, though. Patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula. Pledge today to support the channel and get early access to vids and private movie night live streams with me, Dr. Wolfula. If you liked this video, like it, and if you loved it, click the subscribe and bell buttons for more vids. I'd also like to thank these fine folks pledged my shout-out tier on Patreon for all their kind support. Videos like this wouldn't be possible without all their help. Thank you for watching, see you next time. Dr. Wolfula signing out.